Tom Hartman in Washington, D.C., and here's what's coming up tonight on The Big Picture. Donald Trump's illegal and unconstitutional Muslim ban has caused complete chaos at airports all across the country. Is that the point? We'll talk about that and more in tonight's Progressive Roundtable. And one of the president's most important advisors now says that Trump will pull the U.S. out of the Paris Climate Accords, arguably the last real hope we have of stopping runaway global warming. Is it now game over for the planet? The answer later on in the program. You need to know this. By conventional standards, Donald Trump's Muslim ban has been a total disaster. It's provoked massive protests in several major cities, it's created confusion at high levels of the national security apparatus, and it's led to an unnecessary and politically damaging clash between the judicial and executive branches of government. Just in case there was any remaining doubt that the American government is under the control of rank amateurs, the past 72 hours essentially confirmed it. But what if all that chaos of the past few days was actually intentional? What if it was all a giant test run for a much bigger power grab sometime in the near future? What if the rollout of the Muslim ban was a trial balloon for a coup? That's what blogger Yonatan Zunger argues in a piece he wrote for this weekend for Medium. Connecting the dots between all the events of the past few days, Zunger says that the point of the Muslim ban wasn't just to ban Muslims per se, but also to see how the country would react to an aggressive power grab by this administration. This is why, Zunger argues, the situation at Dulles Airport that we saw on Saturday and Sunday was such a big deal. Even after a federal court stepped in and said the green card holders detained under the Muslim ban must be allowed to see a lawyer, Border Patrol agents refused to allow them access to their attorneys and refused to answer questions from 4 sitting U.S. congressmen about what was going on. This apparently was exactly the type of scenario the Trump administration intended to create when it ordered the Muslim ban. According to Yonatan Zunger, the administration is testing the extent to which the DHS and other executive agencies can act and ignore orders from the other branches of government. So, are we actually witnessing the trial run for a coup? And if so, how should Americans respond? Let's ask tonight's Progressive Roundtable. With me for tonight's Progressive Roundtable are David Halperin, lawyer and regular contributor at RepublicReport.org. David's also a former staffer for the National Security Council and Senate Intelligence Committee during the Clinton administration. And Alex Lawson, Executive Director of Social Security Works. Guys, thank you both for being here tonight.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks.
So, what do you make of this? Is this just complete hyperbole and hysteria to think that this is methodical, it's well thought out, they're trying to create, protest fatigue, they're trying to test what happens if the courts come back, and can they get an executive agency like DHS, which apparently they've done, to ignore court orders? I mean, David, your thoughts?
You don't have to believe every aspect of every conspiracy theory or know that the entire dossier that showed up is real to believe that they are trying to impose some kind of chaos in the United States. I think these are the real bad hombres. These people, Trump, Bannon, Flynn, they are bigots. They are people who are trying to stir things up, trying to basically seize power, trying to intimidate the press, trying to intimidate the civil servants and other people already in the government, and trying to basically make the public quiescent as they try to achieve a hard right agenda that also, unfortunately, has a sinister kleptocratic aspect connected to trying to make money for people involved and connected to the administration.
Well, and while all the circus was going on, the Congress, the Republicans, Paul Ryan and friends, and Mitch McConnell, in fact, was doing complementary legislation in the Senate today, repealing EPA rules, the methane rules on fracking and wellheads. There were 4 of them altogether. I don't remember all 4 of them, but it's like they're dismantling basically the environmental legacy of the Obama administration. Alex, your thoughts?
Or just looting the public coffers as fast as possible, yes, under the chaos of what Trump is creating. You know, the idea that Paul Ryan is just spineless or something and won't stand up to Trump is just ridiculous. He has been waiting his entire life for this moment when there's something going on that Trump's creating that is so chaotic and drawing everyone's attention that they're not going to notice that he's reaching his hand into our pockets and stealing our money by destroying Social Security, by destroying Medicare, destroying Medicaid. I agree. You don't have to agree with the entire piece or the premise, but what you are seeing is just the executive trying to hoover up as much power as possible. You don't have to reference that blog post. You could go back to Hobbes and say that this is exactly what you will always see.
Thomas Hobbes, 1634.
Exactly, and Bannon knows that. And Trump doesn't know that because that man doesn't know many things, but Bannon knows that. And that deal cut with Customs and Border Patrol, I mean, this is the union that represents them. That part of it endorsed Donald Trump. So I want an army of FOIA requests, because if this was actually coming from the White House and they were saying ignore judicial orders, I mean, that is a constitutional crisis and people need to be punished for it. So I think the premise or your setup, you know, as scary as it sounds, it's true. But the answer is the American people stand up, fight back. There's far more people who are like, no, we don't want this vision that's coming from Bannon.
There's another kind of out there theory about why he did the Muslim ban the way he did. And that is that, you know, outside of 9/11, we have not been attacked externally. You know, nobody's come into the United States and harmed us. There have been a couple of homegrown folks. No refugees have attacked us. I mean, this makes no sense. So, but, you know, 9/11 worked out really, really well for George W. Bush. He did exactly what Osama bin Laden wanted, and he did exactly what George Bush wanted. I mean, you know, he told Mickey Herskowitz, the guy who ghost wrote his autobiography in '99, that if he became president, he was going to have a war with Iraq, and it wasn't going to make it a 100-hour war like his daddy's. He was going to make it a long war so he'd get reelected and be able to privatize Social Security. And he did. And, you know, so there's another theory floating around out there that what they're trying to do is, frankly, you know, upset, anger, freak out, whatever, enough Muslims around the world that there actually will be an attack in the United States, and then Trump can come charging to the rescue like Superman. Is this like, I mean, you know, this is clearly putting our troops in Iraq at risk. But is that theory too far out there for you, Alex?
Not at all.
Okay.
It's right. I mean, it's clear that what Donald Trump is doing is making America less safe on purpose. He's replacing the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the National Director of Intelligence on the National Security Council with a blogger.
Yeah.
A blogger. This man is a blogger. That's all he is. And now all of a sudden this political blogger is actually privy to the kill list, right? The list that allows American drones to assassinate in a targeted manner people up to and including U.S. citizens. This blogger is now sitting at the table for that. That makes our country less safe. That is part of the design.
David, your thoughts?
That is what's happening. It is some of the, you know, the most hateful people in the country are now in the White House. Trump ran on fear. He won by scaring people. He thinks now, and I think Bannon thinks and Flynn think, they combine their hatred of Islam and their own personal fear of Islam and their own bigotry, and they use it as fuel. And you're right. I mean, this Muslim ban is not effective. It doesn't target the actual people who have committed terrorist acts in the United States. And as every security expert in the world who's not in the Trump administration or on the Hill for the Republicans has pointed out, it's counterproductive. It will make the terrorists, it's fuel for their hate, it's fuel for their propaganda, and it's fuel for attacks. So whether they intended it or not, it probably will make us less safe.
That's really unfortunate. Meanwhile, police in Quebec City, Canada now say that 6 people have died in the wake of a shooting at a local mosque that they're referring to as a terrorist attack. The suspect in the shooting has been identified as Alexandre Bissonnet, a 27-year-old French-Canadian who apparently expressed right-wing, anti-immigrant, and pro-Trump opinions. He's facing 6 charges of first-degree murder. And today, Sean Spicer tried to conflate the burning of that mosque by a white Christian Trump-supporting right-winger as justification for Trump's Muslim ban, implying it was a Muslim who attacked the mosque.
This is another senseless act of violence that cannot be tolerated. We condemn this attack in the strongest possible terms. It's a terrible reminder of why we must remain vigilant and why the President is taking steps to be proactive rather than reactive when it comes to our nation's safety and security.
Never once even mentioned. It's a white guy Trump supporter who burned down the mosque. Meanwhile, or killed these people, rather. Meanwhile, police in Texas are investigating the cause of a fire that burned down the Islamic Center of Victoria. That fire came just hours after Trump issued his Muslim ban, and his hate crimes against Muslims have reached a decade-long high, according to the FBI. Does anyone else get the feeling that we're watching the modern-day version of the period right before Kristallnacht? David?
So, two questions. Are we going to ban Canadians or French Canadians from the United States? Are we going to amend the order? And are we going to build a wall between the United States and Canada? I mean, those questions, the attack came from a French Canadian.
Well, actually, that, Justin Trudeau yesterday came out and said, anybody that the United States, any of these vetted refugees that the United States won't take, will take to Canada. So if they're going to Canada, then maybe Trump is going to propose building a wall, across the Canadian border, which would be insane unless he starts a construction company, and then it would start to make sense. Alex, your thoughts?
I mean, this is one of those, who could have foreseen, oh wait, literally anyone who's been paying attention, that hardcore reactionary right-wing militias have done more murdering, more chaos, more mayhem than any single other group. And when DHS tried to report on that, the Republicans in Congress memory hold the report. That's how they deal with the threats that are real in this country.
And that was a report,
they ignore them.
That was a report that was put together by the FBI during the Bush administration.
Exactly.
And it rolled out the first week of the Obama, or the first couple of weeks of the Obama administration, and of course the right wing came down on him like like the wrath of God.
It's because they are making America less safe, and that is part of their plan. They want to make America less safe. You can, everyone can kind of come up with their and then, but that is clearly what they're doing, because they're going against all expert advice around the Muslim ban.
David, you've been on the National Security Council. Does this make any sense from a logical perspective?
Well, people said to me, are you concerned that the strategist to the president is in the meetings? I said, no, but I'm concerned that the strategist to the president is Steve Bannon. Bannon, Flynn, and Trump are all bigots. And they're all people with a very angry view of the world. They're people that seem unsteady with poor judgment. So the whole thing makes me nervous. I worked at the National Security Council, and it was professionals. It was people on detail from other agencies, as well as experts who came from academia or came from other places and knew about these issues. Now what you've got are not grown-ups. You do not have grown-ups in the White House running national security. And then what do? To cap it off, they decide to appoint Secretary of State. They're voting right now in the Senate on Rex Tillerson. Who is Rex Tillerson? His only foreign policy experience is making business deals with the #1 hero of Donald Trump, Vladimir Putin. Sure. So it's a terrible addition to the team. And then also you've got Jeff Sessions, who should not be underestimated as the link to all of this, as another angry, bigoted architect of these things. And all of them form an arc that is absolutely, absolutely astounding and appalling, and we're going to have to fight back against it.
There you go. David, Alex, thank you both for being with us tonight. Coming up, is the environmental movement the greatest threat to freedom in the world? One of Donald Trump's advisors thinks so. More on that right after the break.
The presidents of Russia and the United States have had their historic phone call. By all accounts, restoring this bilateral relationship has started. Putin and Trump want this, but will it happen?
About your sudden passing, I've only just learned. You wore yourself thin, taking your last wrong turn. Your act got up to you as we all knew it would. I'd tell you I'm sorry, if only I could. So I write these last words in hopes to put to rest these things that I never got off my chest. I remember when we first met, my life turned on each breath. But then my feelings started to change. You talked about war like it was a game. Still, some were fond of you, those that didn't like to question or argue. And I secretly promised to never be like you. It's said one does not leave a funeral the same as one enters. The mind gets consumed with death, but this one quite differs. I speak to you now because there were no other takers. To proclaim that mainstream media has met its maker.
You know, all the anti-globalization protests that have occurred over the years, you would think that they would be celebrating because now, according to Trump, the world needs to be deglobalized. The New World Order, as it was called, the concentration of power and wealth amongst some unelected bureaucrats in various centers around the world, are being challenged. And the result should be more jobs, more high-paying jobs in the U.S. So my point is, I'm not sure why we don't hear more from the progressives celebrating this dismantling of the globalized autocracy.
For tonight's Green Report, we head across the pond to London, where earlier today, one of the key members of Donald Trump's transition team broke some potentially major news about climate policy under the new administration. Speaking to reporters, global warming denier Myron Ebell, the head of the fossil fuel industry-backed Competitive Enterprise Institute, said that Donald Trump will withdraw the United States from the Paris Climate Accords. The U.S. will clearly change its course on climate policy, Ebell said. Trump has made it clear he will withdraw from the Paris Agreement. He could do it by executive order tomorrow, or he could do it as part of a larger package. If Myron Ebell is right and Trump is considering a withdrawal from the Paris Climate Accords, that would mark something of a major shift in policy. Although Trump dropping out of the Paris Agreement was something Trump flirted with on the campaign trail, he told the New York Times after his election in November that he would at least keep an open mind about it. But now it appears as though he has already made up his mind that the Paris Climate Accord is toast. He's literally playing with fire here, literally and figuratively. In just 10 days in office, Donald Trump has inflamed popular opinion like no other president in recent memory. By some counts, there were 145 protests in just the first 100 hours of his presidency. So with activists already gearing up for a major march in protest of the administration's climate policies, how will the destruction of the Paris Climate Agreement be received? Joining me is Kea Chatterjee, Executive Director of the U.S. Climate Action Network. Kea, welcome back to the program.
Thank you for having me.
It's great having you with us. So, the Paris Accords obviously were not perfect. The problem with these consensus things is that they're always so careful, and in retrospect, every single one of them has been massively understated. So what's your response to Myron Ebell's comments? What do you think about this?
Well, there appears to be infighting within, if you can call it an administration, this administration. It's a unusual set of characters. It was always unusual that Ebell had anything to do with the transition team. He now has no actual affiliation with the administration, but is running around Europe making policy proclamations that seem to be counter to what nominees for the Trump cabinet are saying as they're testifying in Congress. So I see this as yet another confusing piece of data that shows a lot of infighting happening within Trump's people.
That's interesting. So he also said that we could just pull out of the UN's entire climate framework. Would that make us a pariah state? I mean, what does that mean?
We would be alone among the major economies of the world. The big piece of progress, of course, with the Paris Climate Agreement was that we had all of the major economies of the world, really all of the countries of the world, signing onto the agreement, and it will hold regardless of what Trump does. I think that the notion on the campaign trail that he had that you could cancel the climate agreement is simply untrue. You can't do it. There are many, many other countries in the world that are signatories, and they've made it clear that they are still in. U.S. businesses, over 600, have signed a letter saying that they're still in. Fortune 500 companies, mayors of all the cities in this country have said they're still in. So this isn't. This just simply isn't something that they alone control. They can pretend that climate change doesn't exist. They can put Myron Ebell into positions on the transition team where he goes against 97% of climate scientists and believes it doesn't exist. But that doesn't actually stop climate change. Like, climate change doesn't care whether they believe it in or not. It continues to happen, and the rest of the world continues to act unanimously. The United States would be alone.
Yeah, the Paris Agreement does not have implementation teeth. It's an entirely voluntary arrangement by all the countries, if my recollection is correct. Correct me if I'm wrong. So if that's the case, couldn't Trump just ignore it?
Yeah, there's no question that Trump could decide not to implement federal policies, and we're already seeing moves in that direction. But whether or not the U.S. acts on climate change is not up to the U.S. executive branch alone. At this point, we are not an autocracy. We have lots of levels of government. We have lots of branches of government, 3. And so I think that what's important to watch out for is what's happening at all these other levels of government. We have large economies and sources of emission in states like California, states like New York, where there are really ambitious targets that will need to be increased if there's no federal action. One of the issues about climate change is that even in a different scenario where you had a Clinton administration, even those targets were low relative to where we needed to be. So we've always had an uphill battle on climate change. We've always known that that we had this enormous moral obligation and that the technology was there, but the politics were always difficult because in any administration, the fossil fuel industry was going to try and stop us. The difference here is that the fossil fuel industry is actually proposed to be the administration.
Yeah. What dimension or what aspect of the various things that, and it's not just Trump, by the way, we should acknowledge that this afternoon both the House and the Senate were meeting on rolling back EPA regulations. I mean, they've already begun, and trying to send stuff to Trump to sign. Where could the most damage be done?
The actions that Congress is talking about in terms of rolling back regulations are very damaging. The actions, one of the interesting things about the Paris Agreement is that it actually in some ways takes 4 years to pull out of the Paris Agreement. It doesn't happen immediately. The global community was thinking about a potential for a Trump presidency.
4 years,
and so
presidential
yeah,
term.
so it's not a coincidence, I don't think. And so on the case of the Paris Agreement, there is a backstop. We have 4 years to turn things around. Right. In the case of these executive orders, it's more difficult. Like we need to see some backbone from members of Congress in standing up for what the people of this country want. We know that by and large, the American public supports the Paris Climate Agreement because they want an agreement that includes all countries and takes action on climate change. By and large, they support all of the actions to protect our clean air and to protect our clean water and to take on polluters. So this is not a case where the American public is at all in sync with what the Republicans in Congress are doing and what the Trump administration is proposing doing. Like they're in sync with the polluters and the public is in a very different place.
Yeah, I don't think there's frankly anything where the Republicans and the American public, but that's a whole. Talk about the People's Climate March, this version 2 or version 2017. Yeah. What's going on with it?
So we are at a point in time where everything is under threat. The future of our country is under threat. Because of the impacts of climate change, we're under threat. Working families, family-sustaining jobs are under threat. The LGBTQ community is under threat. Differently abled people are under threat. Everything we love and everything that is dear to us and our families is under threat in this moment. And so what we've said is that we know bad things will happen during the first 100 days, but we want to take that 100th day, April 29th, to be a moment where we all stand up together and say, we are here to protect our families. We will not stand down. We will be counted. This is what the American people want. We want action on climate change, and we demand that the government protect our families.
Yeah. So are there points of intersection between the climate movement and all the other anti-Trump movements that are popping up? We've got, refugees and families and people who are supporters of rule of law and people who are saying, hey, wait a minute, there's not 3 million, illegal voters. And I mean, it's like name your outrage, right?
Yeah.
And there's all these groups that are popping up. Can we pull them together?
Absolutely. I mean, I think this is a moment of solidarity. On a personal level, I was out all weekend at a variety of demonstrations about the Muslim ban, about not wanting a wall. We are in solidarity with the immigration rights movement, with the LGBTQ community, with workers in this country, and we are having a moment where we're saying let's all come together. In this case, around talking talking about how the actions taken on climate change in the first 100 days are an atrocity, but as part of a broader week of actions and period of actions. April 29th marks 100 days into this administration. Lord knows what awful things will have happened. That goes into May Day, which has its own importance for the workers' rights community, and into an immigration march. And so we're seeing this as a continuum where we all need to stand together and stand for each other, because there are more of us than there are of them, and we need to make sure that that counts and that matters.
Amen. And none of us are just one thing, you know. So
no, I mean, all of us are human beings, and so
there you go. Yeah, it's great having you with us. Thanks so much.
Thank you for having me.
And now the big picture fact of the day. The idea put out by the Trump administration and its far-right supporters that refugees are a Trojan horse for terrorism is a flat-out lie, or as close as you can get statistically to a lie. According to State Department data, of the 785,000 refugees allowed into the United States since 2001, just 1 dozen, fewer than 1%, have been removed from the country over terrorism concerns. 0 of those removed were Syrian. And that's the way it is tonight. And don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. Get out there, get active, tag, you're it.